Chapter 6 is social policy to address the worst economic catastrophe in the U.S. history. Reforms during and immediately after the Great Depression, the era of denial, 1929 to March 1933, Americans were so stunned by the economic catastrophe that they took little corrective action. During the period of emergency reforms, Americans supported a large number of reforms but tended to believe that prosperity would soon return and that these reforms were temporary. During an era of policy stalemate, the momentum of New Deal reform was decisively broken. The beginning of the Great Depression. It was the worst economic catastrophe to hit the U.S. when stock prices plunged. Panicked investors rushed to sell their stocks, leading to even greater declines in stock prices. Consumers lacked resources to purchase goods and services. Response of Herbert Hoover to the Great Depression. His measures did not address the economic needs of local governments. He became more conservative as the nation gradually moved towards more liberal ideas, and he resorted to budget balancing and various monetary solutions to complement his woefully inadequate program. The election of 1932, Franklin D. Roosevelt won over Herbert Hoover. Roosevelt promised a New Deal. Hoover had been ineffective in finding solutions to the Depression and ending the suffering of many Americans. The American public was ready to give the Democrats a chance. Conflicted context. Roosevelt had extraordinary power because he had gained support not only from the working class but also from a sizable portion of the middle class. And Roosevelt and his inner circle of advisors reasoned that interventions could be devised in a trial and error fashion until something worked. No alliances formed between groups that represented urban workers and distressed people in rural areas. Many farmers turned against the New Deal in the late 1930s because they resented its emphasis on urban reforms. Roosevelt developed politically ingenious strategies. He had two budgets, the regular budget that funded the War Department and the Post Office, etc., which was money from tax revenues, and then he had an emergency budget which funded programs to help the unemployed, which was from government bonds. And he could then promise to balance the budget. Policy reforms during the era of emergency reforms, federal spending for emergency relief, moving from cash assistance to creating work programs and developing a work relief program for complex projects. Trying to end the Great Depression by increasing federal spending, attacking speculation in stocks, restoring confidence in banks, because people didn't trust the banks, and stopping the vicious circle of job and price cuts in industry. Stopping the vicious circle of price cuts and increased production in agriculture, averting foreclosures and reviving economies in vast regions. The Social Security Act, two insurance programs, the unemployment insurance and old age pensions funded through payroll taxes. Future generations would not have to fund through general revenues. The National Labor Relations Bond mediated conflicts between employers and employees, promoted the growth of unions, and protected their rights to strike, and secured labor contributions and votes for Democrats until the 70s. Work Progress Administration, a public works program which put 7.8 million people to work, completed a remarkable array of projects, and assumed a major role in disaster relief work. The National Youth Administration provided financial aid for poor college students, provided jobs for poor youth, and more than 600,000 youth were helped by this program. Political successes from 1937 to 38, the funding of WPA, CCC, and NYA increased. Fair Labor Standards Act of 1938, the Wagner-Steagall Housing Act, attacking administrative abuses of welfare programs, reorganizing federal social welfare programs. Oppression of women made some economic and social gains, but still discriminated against. Birth control is still legal in areas. Lower wages for the same work as men. Cult of domesticity remained intact. And priority given to employment for men. Oppression of Latinos. Many were farm workers and were not covered by labor laws. They were deported if they sought welfare aid, and they encountered racial animosity from public and from law enforcement. Oppression of African Americans. Hard times increased racism as white feared that the African Americans would take their jobs. And they were the first to be laid off. In a company, African Americans in the South received higher wages from the WPA than they had received in the fields. Oppression of Asian Americans. They were denied citizenship, denied access to relief programs. They were prevented from working in most occupations. And Japanese Americans forced into internment camps during World War II. Social workers in the New Deal. By the end of the 1920s, social work had consolidated its position with the development of many schools. Social casework, which emphasized diagnosis and scientific work, still bore some resemblance to the older charity work because it focused on people and the environment. The Great Depression and World War II benefited the social work profession. Social workers had been employed in private agencies in the 1920s, but thousands of jobs opened up in the New Deal agencies in the 1930s. And the number of people in social work positions increased from 40,000 in 1930 to 70,000 in 1940. Social workers in the New Deal, certain central tendencies and developments of the 1920s and 30s, dominance of casework, the decision by most social workers to support relatively liberal social policies but not radical reforms. The New Deal represented a departure from traditional American policy. And what we learned from the New Deal, many initiatives were partnered between federal government and the states or employers. The programs would not have succeeded or endured without federal funding. And social workers must be familiar with federal, state, and local